The whistle blast echoes across the football field as coach Tommy Brennan raises his arms in victory. 26 years later, those same hands would be placed behind his back in handcuffs. The man who helped search for Jennifer Walsh was the one who killed her. This is the story of how a community's most trusted figure became their worst nightmare, and how one detective's refusal to give up finally brought justice to a case that seemed impossible to solve. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across Coral Springs as Detective Maria Valdez pulled into the parking lot of Cypress Creek High School. October in South Florida meant the oppressive summer heat was finally breaking, and the humidity that clung to everything like a second skin was beginning to lift. Palm trees swayed gently in the breeze, their fronds catching the golden light that made everything look like a postcard. Maria had been in Coral Springs for 8 months now, having transferred from Miami-Dade after her partner's death in a drug bust gone wrong. She'd chosen this suburban paradise specifically because nothing ever happened here. The biggest crimes were teenage vandalism and the occasional domestic dispute. It was exactly what she needed, a place to heal, to remember why she'd become a cop in the first place. The high school sprawled before her. A typical Florida educational complex with low-slung buildings connected by covered walkways. Students moved between classes in the easy rhythm of adolescence, their voices carrying across the courtyard in waves of laughter and conversation. Homecoming week had transformed the campus into a carnival of school spirit. Orange and blue streamers hung from every available surface, and hand-painted banners proclaimed the upcoming game against their crosstown rivals. Maria was here for a routine visit, part of the community policing initiative that had been implemented district-wide. These visits weren't about law enforcement. They were about building relationships, showing students that police officers were part of their community, not separate from it. In Miami, such idealism had been beaten out of her by years of seeing humanity's darker impulses. But here, surrounded by the infectious energy of teenagers preparing for homecoming, she found herself cautiously optimistic. The gymnasium buzzed with activity as students decorated floats for the parade. Grape paper roses bloomed under inexperienced hands, while others struggled with chicken wire and tissue paper. The air smelled of spray paint and glue, mixed with the lingering scent of cleaning supplies that seemed to permeate every school building. Detective Valdez. She turned to see a tall man approaching, his athletic build evident even beneath the casual polo shirt and khakis that marked him as faculty. His graying hair was cut short, military style, and his handshake was firm, confident. This had to be Coach Brennan. She'd heard about him from other officers, from parents, from anyone who spent more than 5 minutes talking about the school. Tommy Brennan, he introduced himself, his voice carrying the slight rasp of someone who'd spent decades shouting instructions across football fields. Thanks for coming out today. The kids really get a kick out of meeting you folks. Maria had done her homework on the major figures at Cypress Creek High, and Thomas Brennan's file read like a Community Service Award nomination. 23 years as head football coach, with a record that had earned the team 3 state championships. Volunteer coordinator for local youth programs. Mentor to countless students who'd gone on to college scholarships. The kind of man who coached football but taught life lessons. Who remembered the names of players from decades past and never missed a wedding or graduation. Happy to be here. Coach, the homecoming preparations look impressive. Brennan's face lit up with genuine pride. Wait until you see the parade on Friday. These kids put more effort into those floats than some of them do their homework. He chuckled, the sound warm and paternal. Though don't tell them I said that. They walked together through the gymnasium, Brennan pointing out various projects and introducing Maria to students who looked up from their work with the mixture of curiosity and nervousness that teenagers reserve for authority figures. She noticed how easily he interacted with them, how they gravitated toward him with questions and jokes. There was something magnetic about his presence, a natural leadership quality that explained his success both on the field and in the classroom. "Jennifer, come meet Detective Valdez." The girl who approached was everything a homecoming queen should be: tall, blonde, with the kind of natural confidence that comes from being genuinely well-liked rather than merely popular. Jennifer Walsh moved with the grace of someone comfortable in her own skin, her smile reaching her eyes as she extended her hand. "Nice to meet you, ma'am. Are you here to arrest Coach Brennan for making us run laps in this heat?" "Jennifer's our student council president," Brennan explained, his tone carrying the fondness of a proud father. "Straight A's, full scholarship to University of Florida next fall. She's also our secret weapon for keeping the underclassmen in line during these projects." The girl blushed at the praise, but didn't deflect it, secure enough to accept compliments gracefully. Maria found herself impressed by the teenager's poise. At 17, she carried herself with a maturity that spoke well of her upbringing and the community that had shaped her. "What are your plans for after graduation?" Maria asked, pre-med track hopefully. "I want to come back here eventually, maybe work at Coral Springs Medical Center. This community gave me so much growing up. I'd like to give something back." It was the kind of answer that would make any parent beam with pride, delivered without the rehearsed quality that often accompanied teenagers' college interview responses. Jennifer Walsh was the real deal, intelligent, grounded, with clear goals and the work ethic to achieve them. The conversation was interrupted by David Chen, the editor of the local newspaper, who'd been documenting the homecoming preparations. He was newer to the community than Maria, having moved to Coral Springs just 6 months ago with his wife and young daughter. His camera clicked steadily as he captured the organized chaos of the gymnasium. "This is going to make a great front-page spread," he commented, adjusting his lens to frame a group of students wrestling with an oversized papier-mâché panther head. "I've covered homecoming at schools in 3 different states, and I've never seen this level of community involvement." It was true. Parents moved between workstations with the efficiency of a NASCAR pit crew, their presence so natural that it was clear this wasn't a one-day volunteer effort, but part of an ongoing relationship with the school. Local businesses had donated supplies, their logos proudly displayed on banners thanking community sponsors. The pizza place down the street was setting up free lunch for all the volunteers. The hardware store had provided paint and brushes at cost. This was small-town America at its best, Maria reflected. The kind of place where people knew their neighbors' names, where local businesses succeeded because they genuinely cared about the community they served, where a high school football game could bring together 3 generations of families, united in their shared pride and investment in the young people who represented their town's future. As the morning wore on, Maria found herself drawn into the preparations despite her intention to simply observe. She helped string lights along the edges of one float, her police training making her surprisingly adept at creating structurally sound decorative elements. The students peppered her with questions about police work, their curiosity innocent and genuine. These weren't kids who viewed law enforcement with suspicion or hostility. They saw her as part of their extended community family. Coach Brennan worked tirelessly, moving between groups with encouraging words and practical solutions to engineering problems. When a float's wheel mechanism jammed, he had it fixed in minutes. When paint ran low, he somehow produced extra supplies from the athletic department's storage. When tempers flared over creative differences, he mediated with the skill of someone who'd spent decades managing teenage personalities. "He's really something, isn't he?" Jennifer commented, following Maria's gaze as they watched Brennan help a group of freshmen attach streamers to their banner. "I don't know what this school would do without him. Half the guys on the team say he changed their lives. My brother graduated 5 years ago, and he still calls Coach for advice." The affection in her voice was unmistakable, the kind of respect that couldn't be manufactured or demanded. It had to be earned through years of consistent care and genuine investment in young people's lives. Maria had seen enough manipulative authority figures to recognize the real thing when she encountered it. As the morning session wound down and students began cleaning up their work areas, the gymnasium gradually transformed back into a space meant for basketball games and school assemblies. But the energy remained, crackling with anticipation for the week's upcoming events. The parade on Friday, the game on Saturday, the dance that would cap off the homecoming celebration. Maria gathered her things, preparing to head back to the station for her afternoon patrol shift. The visit had accomplished exactly what community policing was supposed to achieve. She felt more connected to the people she served, more invested in their welfare and safety. These weren't just names in incident reports or voices on 911 calls. They were real people with hopes and dreams, and the kind of fundamental decency that made protecting them feel like a privilege rather than just a job. Coach Brennan walked her to the parking lot, their conversation continuing the easy rapport they'd established throughout the morning. The October sun was approaching its zenith, and the heat was beginning to build toward the afternoon peak that would send most sensible people indoors or to air-conditioned spaces. "Thanks again for coming out today, Detective. It means a lot to have community support like this. Thank you for having me. This is exactly why I moved to Coral Springs, to be part of something like this." They shook hands again, and Maria climbed into her patrol car, already looking forward to Friday's parade. As she drove through the tree-lined streets toward the station, she reflected on how different this assignment felt from her years in Miami. There, police work had been about reaction, responding to crimes after they'd been committed, trying to piece together the aftermath of human failures. Here it felt proactive, preventive. She was building relationships that might help keep these kids from ever needing her professional services. The radio crackled with routine calls, a fender bender on University Drive, a noise complaint from one of the apartment complexes near the mall. Normal afternoon activity for a Tuesday in paradise. Maria smiled as she responded to dispatch, settling into the rhythm of small-town policing. She had no way of knowing that in 3 days, this peaceful community would be shattered by an event that would haunt her for the next 26 years. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The call came in at 11:47 p.m. on Thursday night, 3 hours before Jennifer Walsh was supposed to be crowned homecoming queen. Maria Valdez had been reviewing case files in her small apartment when her pager buzzed. The dispatcher's voice carried an urgency she hadn't heard since her Miami days. Possible missing person, juvenile female, last seen Sawgrass Nature Preserve. Family requesting immediate response. 20 minutes later, Maria stood in the Walsh family's driveway, the flashing red and blue lights of her patrol car painting the manicured suburban landscape in alternating shadows. The house itself was a testament to middle-class success. 2-story colonial with a perfectly maintained lawn and flower beds that belonged in a gardening magazine. Halloween decorations adorned the front porch, carved pumpkins grinning in the darkness like witnesses to some cosmic joke. Robert Walsh met her at the door, still wearing his work clothes despite the late hour. His tie hung loose around his neck, and his usually neat hair was disheveled from running his hands through it. Behind him, Sandra Walsh paced the living room, cordless phone clutched in one hand while the other twisted her wedding ring in endless circles. "She never came home," Robert said without preamble. "Jennifer went for her evening run around 7:30. She always takes the same route, down Coral Ridge Drive to the preserve, around the nature trail, then back home. Never takes more than an hour." The living room walls were covered with Jennifer's achievements, honor roll certificates, scholarship award letters, photographs from various school events. The girl smiled down from every surface, frozen in moments of triumph and joy that now seemed to mock the family's terror. Sandra finally stopped pacing and joined the conversation, her voice brittle with barely controlled panic. "I called all her friends. No one's seen her since school. She was supposed to help with last-minute decorations for tomorrow's parade, but she never showed up at the gym. Maria pulled out her notebook, falling into the familiar rhythm of information gathering. What was she wearing when she left? Her usual running outfit, blue Nike shorts, white tank top, running shoes, and her Walkman. She never runs without her Walkman. Sandra's voice broke on the last words, as if mentioning such a mundane detail made the situation more real, more terrifying. Any boyfriends? Anyone she might have made plans with that she didn't mention? Robert shook his head firmly. Jennifer doesn't keep secrets from us. She's never missed curfew, never lied about where she was going. This isn't like her. The certainty in his voice was both touching and heartbreaking. Maria had learned in Miami that parents often knew less about their children than they believed. But something about the Walsh household suggested this family's closeness was genuine. The refrigerator was covered with Jennifer's schedule, student council meetings, volunteer commitments, study groups. Every hour accounted for, every responsibility met. Maria organized a preliminary search party consisting of herself, 2 other officers, and several neighbors who'd gathered as word spread through the community. The Sawgrass Nature Preserve stretched for miles along the western edge of Coral Springs, a maze of elevated walkways threading through wetlands that had been preserved as the city expanded around it. During daylight hours, it was a peaceful haven for joggers, birdwatchers, and families. At night, it became something else entirely. Their flashlight beams cut through the humid darkness, illuminating cypress trees draped with Spanish moss and the occasional glowing eyes of alligators floating motionless in the black water. The boardwalk creaked under their feet as they followed Jennifer's usual route, calling her name into the oppressive silence. Jennifer! Jennifer Walsh! Their voices echoed off the water and disappeared into the vast expanse of the Everglades beyond. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, its haunting cry seeming to mock their human concerns. The preserve that had seemed so benign during the day now felt primordial, dangerous, full of places where someone could vanish without a trace. It was Officer Danny Rodriguez who found the Walkman. Over here. His voice carried across the water with an urgency that made everyone's blood run cold. They converged on a section of the trail where the boardwalk curved around a small pond. The yellow Sony Walkman lay half-submerged in the shallow water near the bank, its headphone cord tangled in the reeds like a discarded fishing line. Maria carefully retrieved the device, noting its position, the way the headphones had caught on the vegetation. The Walkman's battery compartment was cracked, and water had seeped inside, but she could still make out the tape inside. Now that's what I call music. 2. A typical teenage girl's soundtrack for an evening run. Don't touch anything else, she instructed the other searchers. This is now a potential crime scene. The words hung in the night air like a death sentence. Until that moment, everyone had been operating under the assumption that Jennifer had simply taken a wrong turn, gotten lost, maybe twisted an ankle, and was waiting somewhere for help. Finding her Walkman changed everything. Jennifer wouldn't have abandoned her music voluntarily. Something had happened to her. By dawn, the Sawgrass Nature Preserve had been transformed into a major crime scene. The Broward County Sheriff's Department had taken over the investigation, bringing in specialized search teams, K-9 units, and dive teams to search the deeper portions of the waterway. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered in the morning breeze, marking off sections of the preserve that had been Jennifer's peaceful sanctuary just hours before. Coach Brennan arrived with the first wave of volunteers, having cancelled morning practice to help with the search. He moved through the crowd of parents and students with quiet authority, organizing search groups and coordinating with law enforcement. His presence seemed to calm everyone, providing the steady leadership that crisis situations demanded. "We need to be systematic about this," he told the assembled volunteers. "The professionals will handle the preservation itself, but there are other areas Jennifer might have gone. Maybe she changed her route, decided to explore somewhere new. Maria watched him work, impressed by his ability to maintain hope while taking the situation seriously. He'd clearly done this before, not searched for missing teenagers, but managed groups of people under pressure. His coaching experience translated perfectly to crisis management. The search expanded throughout the day, covering every inch of Coral Springs and the surrounding areas. Jennifer's photograph appeared on every telephone pole, in every store window, on every news broadcast. The entire community mobilized with a speed and efficiency that would have been remarkable under any other circumstances. David Chen from the newspaper worked alongside law enforcement, his camera documenting both the search effort and the community's response. What should have been a celebration had become a nightmare, and his lens captured the transformation of a town's mood from anticipation to dread. Students who should have been preparing for the homecoming parade instead walked through drainage ditches and undeveloped lots, calling Jennifer's name until their voices gave out. Parents who'd planned to spend the day decorating the school gymnasium found themselves organizing food and water for search teams. The elaborate homecoming floats sat abandoned in the school parking lot, their bright colors seeming garish and inappropriate in the harsh light of crisis. As evening approached and no sign of Jennifer had been found, the mood grew increasingly desperate. Sandra Walsh had to be sedated by paramedics after collapsing during a television interview. Robert Walsh aged a decade in 12 hours, his face grey with exhaustion and terror. The homecoming game was cancelled. The dance was postponed indefinitely. The elaborate celebration that had consumed the community's attention for weeks was forgotten, replaced by a single overwhelming question: where was Jennifer Walsh? Maria stood at the edge of the preserve as the sun set on the second day, watching dive teams surface empty-handed for the dozenth time. The professional search coordinator from the sheriff's department had been blunt in his assessment. If Jennifer was in the water, they would have found her by now, which meant either she'd been taken somewhere else, or whoever had taken her had hidden her body with considerable skill and planning. The possibility that Jennifer was still alive grew dimmer with each passing hour. Statistics showed that if an abducted teenager wasn't found within the first 48 hours, the chances of recovery alive dropped dramatically. They were rapidly approaching that deadline, and despite the massive search effort, they had nothing but a waterlogged Walkman and an empty stretch of boardwalk. Coach Brennan appeared beside her, his face drawn with exhaustion. He'd been working non-stop for 36 hours, coordinating volunteers, comforting grieving students, serving as the community's rock when everything else seemed to be crumbling. "Any word from the dive teams?" he asked quietly. Maria shook her head. "Nothing. They're going to try further downstream tomorrow, but—" She didn't finish the sentence. They both knew what the silence meant. "That poor girl," Brennan said, his voice heavy with genuine grief. "She had everything going for her. Full scholarship, bright future, loving family. Who would do something like this? Who would hurt Jennifer?" It was the question that haunted everyone, the inexplicable cruelty that made no sense in their ordered, peaceful world. Jennifer Walsh wasn't involved with drugs or dangerous relationships. She didn't run with a wild crowd or put herself in risky situations. She was exactly what she appeared to be. A good kid from a good family living in a safe community, which made her disappearance all the more terrifying. If Jennifer Walsh wasn't safe on a routine evening run through a well-traveled nature preserve, then no one was safe anywhere. The search would continue for 3 more weeks, involving hundreds of volunteers and thousands of man-hours. It would expand to cover most of South Florida, following up on every tip, every possible sighting, every theory, no matter how unlikely. But they would never find Jennifer Walsh. She had simply vanished, as if the earth itself had opened up and swallowed her whole. And somewhere in Coral Springs, a killer walked free, probably helping with the search effort, definitely mourning publicly for the loss of such a promising young life. 3 weeks after Jennifer Walsh vanished, Detective Maria Valdez found herself staring at a wall covered in photographs, maps, and evidence that led nowhere. The conference room at the Coral Springs Police Department had been transformed into a command center for the investigation, every surface covered with the detritus of a case that refused to break. The official search had been scaled back after 2 weeks, but Maria continued working the case with an obsession that worried her supervisor. She'd requested every piece of surveillance footage from businesses along Coral Ridge Drive, interviewed Jennifer's friends multiple times, and personally walked every inch of the nature preserve until she could navigate it blindfolded. The forensics report on the Walkman had yielded nothing useful. Water damage had destroyed any potential fingerprints, and the device's location told them only that Jennifer had been near the pond at some point during her run. Whether she dropped it while fleeing an attacker, had it torn away during a struggle, or lost it in some other manner remained a mystery. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the forensic psychologist brought in from Miami-Dade, studied the crime board with professional detachment. Her presence indicated how seriously the department was taking the case, and how little progress they'd made using conventional investigative methods. "Tell me about the boyfriend situation again," Dr. Martinez said, her voice carrying the slight accent of someone who'd grown up bilingual in South Florida. "There wasn't one." "Not really," Maria replied, consulting her notes. Jennifer had dated a few boys casually, but nothing serious. Her friends all confirmed she wasn't seeing anyone regularly, too focused on college applications and her volunteer work. "What about older men? Teachers, coaches, family friends? Anyone who might have developed an unhealthy interest?" Maria had asked herself the same questions dozens of times. Jennifer's circle had been thoroughly vetted. Her teachers were all women, except for Mr. Patterson in AP Chemistry, who'd been in Orlando with his family the night she disappeared. The youth group leader at her church was a married father of 3, with an alibi confirmed by dozens of witnesses. Even the male students she'd tutored had been interviewed and cleared. "Everyone loved Jennifer," Maria said, the words carrying the frustration of 3 weeks of dead ends. "That's the problem. She wasn't involved in anything controversial, didn't have enemies, wasn't seeing anyone who might have become obsessive. She was just a good kid living a clean life." Dr. Martinez nodded thoughtfully, which suggests either a random predator or someone who was hiding their connection to her very well. "The location of the Walkman is interesting. It's far enough from the main trail to suggest she was either lured there or chased there. The main trail through the sawgrass nature preserve was well lit and frequently used, even in the evening hours. But the area where Jennifer's Walkman had been found was more secluded, accessible only by a narrow side path that most casual visitors never explored. Someone familiar with the preserve would have known about that location, known it was private enough for whatever they had planned. Detective Ray Kowalski, Maria's partner on the case, entered the conference room carrying 2 cups of coffee and looking like he hadn't slept in days. He'd been working the case as hard as Maria, running down leads that invariably led to nothing, following up on tips that ranged from legitimate to lunatic. "Just got off the phone with the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit," he said, setting one of the coffees in front of Maria. "They're willing to create a profile, but they want to wait until we have more evidence. Right now, we don't have enough to work with." It was the same refrain they'd been hearing from everyone. More evidence, more leads, more something. The case felt frozen in amber, suspended between the initial crisis response and the long-term investigation that might take years to resolve. The community had settled into an uneasy new normal. Parents drove their children to school instead of letting them walk. Evening joggers traveled in groups or abandoned outdoor exercise altogether. The nature preserve, once a source of community pride, became a place to avoid after dark. Coach Brennan had become something of an unofficial spokesman for the ongoing investigation, his natural leadership filling the void left by official silence. He organized regular meetings for concerned parents, coordinated with school counselors to help students process their grief and fear, and worked with local businesses to keep Jennifer's case in the public eye. "He's been amazing through all this," Sandra Walsh told Maria during one of their regular check-ins. The woman had aged dramatically in the 3 weeks since her daughter's disappearance, her face gaunt with sleepless nights and constant worry. Coach Brennan calls us every day, makes sure we're eating, helps us deal with all the media requests. I don't know what we'd do without him. Robert Walsh nodded agreement from his position by the window, where he'd taken to standing for hours at a time, watching the street as if Jennifer might somehow appear walking up the driveway. He's organized more search parties than the police department. Last weekend, he had 50 volunteers combing through Tradewinds Park. The weekend before that, they covered every inch of Quiet Waters Park. Maria felt a familiar stab of frustration. The amateur search parties, while well-intentioned, had probably destroyed more potential evidence than they'd uncovered. Crime scenes needed to be processed methodically by trained professionals, not trampled by groups of grieving volunteers. But she couldn't bring herself to criticize people who were trying to help, especially when the official investigation had stalled so completely. The phone calls started coming in during the 4th week of the investigation. Tips from psychics claiming to know where Jennifer's body was buried. Reports of Jennifer sightings from as far away as California and New York. Conspiracy theories about human trafficking rings and satanic cults. Each call had to be investigated, no matter how unlikely. And each investigation led to another dead end. Maria found herself working 16-hour days, following leads that evaporated under scrutiny, interviewing witnesses who'd seen nothing useful, searching areas that yielded only empty beer cans and discarded fast food wrappers. The case consumed her thoughts even when she wasn't actively working it, invading her dreams and turning every routine traffic stop into a reminder of her failure to find Jennifer. The first real break came from an unexpected source. Maria was interviewing Jennifer's biology lab partner, a quiet girl named Amy Chen, David Chen's daughter, when the teenager mentioned something that hadn't appeared in any previous statement. Jennifer was nervous about something the week before she disappeared, Amy said hesitantly. She didn't say what it was exactly, but she kept looking over her shoulder in the hallways, like she thought someone was watching her. Did she mention feeling threatened by anyone specific? Amy shook her head. That's just it. When I asked her about it, she said it was probably nothing. But she seemed really uncomfortable, you know? Like when you get that feeling that someone's staring at you, but you can't figure out who. This was the first indication that Jennifer might have been aware of danger before her disappearance. Maria immediately contacted Jennifer's other friends, asking specifically about any changes in her behavior during those final weeks. The picture that emerged was subtle but disturbing. Jennifer had indeed seemed more cautious, more aware of her surroundings, as if some instinct had warned her that she was being watched. She started asking people to walk her to her car after evening activities, confirmed Sarah Mitchell, Jennifer's best friend. I thought it was weird because she'd always been so independent. But when I asked her about it, she just laughed it off and said she was being paranoid. The revelation changed the entire complexion of the investigation. This wasn't a crime of opportunity committed by a stranger who'd happened upon Jennifer during her evening run. Someone had been stalking her, studying her routines, waiting for the right moment to act. The attack had been planned, which meant the perpetrator was likely someone who knew her schedule, knew she ran the same route every evening, knew exactly when and where she would be vulnerable. Maria began reconstructing Jennifer's final weeks with microscopic attention to detail. Every interaction, every routine, every deviation from her normal patterns. The picture that emerged showed a young woman who'd sensed danger but hadn't been able to identify its source, a predator skilled enough to remain hidden while gathering the information needed to strike. The investigation expanded to include anyone who would have had access to Jennifer's schedule, teachers who knew about her after-school activities, coaches who were aware of her exercise routines, parents of other students who might have overheard conversations about her plans, even maintenance workers and delivery personnel who had regular access to the school. Coach Brennan was among those interviewed as part of this expanded investigation. his session conducted by Detective Kowalski while Maria observed through one-way glass. Brennan's responses were everything they'd come to expect: concerned, helpful, eager to assist in any way possible. "Jennifer was one of our most responsible students," he told them, his voice heavy with grief. "Always punctual, always where she was supposed to be when she was supposed to be there. That's what makes this so hard to understand. Jennifer didn't take risks, didn't put herself in dangerous situations." He provided a detailed account of his whereabouts the evening Jennifer disappeared, at home with his wife, watching television, then going to bed early in preparation for the next day's homecoming activities. His wife confirmed the alibi when interviewed separately, her account matching his in every detail. But something about the interview nagged at Maria, a professional instinct she couldn't quite articulate. Brennan had been helpful, too helpful perhaps. His knowledge of Jennifer's routines was extensive, his grief seemed genuine, and his alibi was solid. Yet something in his demeanor, some subtle quality in his responses, left her with questions she couldn't formulate. As October became November and the investigation entered its second month, the harsh reality began to set in. Without new evidence, without a body, without witnesses or forensic leads, the case was destined to join the growing files of unsolved disappearances that haunted police departments across the country. Jennifer Walsh had vanished as completely as if she'd never existed at all. And somewhere in Coral Springs, her killer was learning that he'd committed the perfect crime. Detective Maria Valdez had never experienced a Florida winter until she moved to Coral Springs. The temperatures barely dipped below 60 degrees, but something about the shorter days and the way the light fell differently through the palm fronds made everything feel colder, more distant. By December 1998, Jennifer Walsh had been missing for 2 months, and the case had settled into the grinding routine of long-term investigations. The command center in the conference room had been dismantled. The photographs and maps were filed away in bankers' boxes that lined the evidence room like tombstones. The daily briefings had become weekly check-ins, then bi-weekly updates. Then nothing at all, except for the reports Maria filed religiously every Friday afternoon, documenting leads that led nowhere and interviews that revealed nothing. She'd developed a ritual of visiting Jennifer's grave marker at Coral Springs Cemetery every Sunday morning. The Walsh family had held a memorial service in November, finally accepting that their daughter wasn't coming home alive. The marker itself was modest, a simple granite stone that read, "Jennifer Marie Walsh, beloved daughter and friend, her light lives on." Fresh flowers appeared weekly, sometimes from the family, sometimes from classmates, sometimes from people Maria never saw, but who clearly remembered the girl who'd vanished from their community. The holidays had been particularly difficult for everyone involved. Christmas decorations throughout Coral Springs seemed muted, as if the entire city was observing some form of communal mourning. The high school's winter formal was cancelled. The New Year's Eve celebration at Regional Park was attended by half the usual crowd. Even the weather seemed to reflect the community's mood. January brought an unusual cold snap that killed the bougainvillea and left the palm trees looking brittle and vulnerable. Maria's relationship with the case had become unhealthily personal. Her supervisor, Captain Williams, had suggested she take some time off, maybe talk to the department's counselor about her obvious obsession with the Walsh investigation. But Maria couldn't let go. Something about Jennifer's disappearance had gotten under her skin, in a way that reminded her why she'd left Miami in the first place. She'd started working the case during her off-duty hours, pursuing leads that the department couldn't justify with official resources. Credit card receipts from gas stations along Jennifer's running route, hoping to find someone who'd been in the area regularly enough to establish a pattern. Employment records from landscaping companies and pool services that worked in the neighborhood, looking for anyone who might have had reason to be watching Jennifer's house. Even old high school yearbooks searching for faces that might have appeared at multiple schools. Someone who followed teenage girls from district to district. The psychological profile from the FBI had finally arrived in February, and it read like a textbook description of a sexual predator. The perpetrator was likely a white male between 25 and 45, familiar with the area. Possibly someone who worked in a position that gave him access to teenage girls or information about their schedules. He would appear normal to his neighbors and co-workers, might be married or in a relationship, and would be following the investigation closely, possibly even participating in search efforts or memorial activities. Reading the profile had made Maria's skin crawl, not because it told her anything she didn't already suspect, but because it described half the men in Coral Springs. The age range included teachers, coaches, parents, business owners, maintenance workers, and delivery drivers. The behavioral indicators could apply to anyone who'd shown interest in the case, which, in a community this small and close-knit, meant virtually everyone. She'd started paying closer attention to the people who remained most involved in keeping Jennifer's memory alive. Coach Brennan continued organizing monthly memorial runs through the nature preserve, events that drew dozens of participants and raised money for a scholarship fund in Jennifer's name. David Chen wrote regular updates about the case for the newspaper, keeping public attention focused on the investigation. Several of Jennifer's teachers had started a mentorship program for at-risk students, using her story as inspiration for positive change. The memorial troubled Maria in ways she couldn't articulate. There was something grotesque about dozens of people jogging along the same route where Jennifer had vanished, following the exact path that had led to her death. Coach Brennan always led the group, setting a pace that allowed everyone to participate while telling stories about Jennifer's dedication to fitness and her dreams of studying medicine. She used to say that running cleared her mind. Brennan had told the group during February's memorial run, his voice carrying clearly over the wooden boardwalk. Said it helped her think through problems, plan for the future. This preserve was her sanctuary, the place where she felt most at peace. Maria had participated in that run, telling herself she was there for investigative purposes, but knowing she was really there because she couldn't stay away. She'd watched Brennan interact with the other participants, noting his easy familiarity with everyone, his ability to comfort grieving parents while motivating younger runners. He'd asked about her progress on the case, expressing frustration that no arrests had been made while remaining optimistic that justice would eventually prevail. "I know you're doing everything possible," he'd told her as they completed the circuit back to the parking area. "Jennifer deserves better than being forgotten, and I know you won't let that happen." His faith in her abilities had been both touching and burdensome. Maria was increasingly convinced that Jennifer's case might never be solved, at least not through conventional investigative methods. Without a body, without witnesses, without physical evidence beyond a waterlogged Walkman, they were operating almost entirely on speculation and hope. The break she'd been praying for came from an unexpected source in March. A construction crew working on a new subdivision development 3 miles from the nature preserve had uncovered human remains while clearing vegetation from a drainage canal. The bones were clearly old, weathered by months of exposure to Florida's humid climate, and the location was remote enough that they might have remained hidden indefinitely if not for the construction project. Maria was on scene within 20 minutes of receiving the call, her heart hammering with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The remains were scattered over a wide area, scattered by animals and weather, but the medical examiner's preliminary assessment suggested they belonged to a teenage female who'd been dead for several months. The dental records comparison took 3 days that felt like 3 years. Maria barely slept, barely ate, spent her time alternating between desperate hope that they'd finally found Jennifer and equally desperate hope that some other family wouldn't have to endure the pain of confirmation. When the call finally came, she was sitting in her car outside the Walsh house, gathering courage for a conversation she'd been dreading since October. The bones weren't Jennifer's. The remains belonged to Maria Santos, a 17-year-old from Fort Lauderdale who'd been reported missing the previous summer. Her disappearance had received minimal media attention because Maria came from a working-class immigrant family without the community connections that had mobilized Coral Springs around Jennifer's case. The discovery of her body opened a new investigation, but provided no answers about Jennifer Walsh. Maria had to deliver the news to the Walsh family personally, watching their faces cycle through relief, disappointment, and renewed grief as they processed the information. They'd been hoping for closure, even if it came in the worst possible form. Instead, they were left with continued uncertainty. Their daughter still missing, their questions still unanswered. At least that other family knows now, Sandra Walsh had said, her voice hollow with exhaustion. At least they can stop wondering, stop hoping for something that's never going to happen. Spring brought new challenges to the investigation. Tourism season filled South Florida with temporary residents and visitors, any one of whom might have information about Jennifer's disappearance. The tip line received dozens of calls from snowbirds who'd wintered in the area, people who'd driven through Coral Springs months earlier, tourists who thought they might have seen something suspicious but hadn't reported it at the time. Each tip required follow-up. Each lead demanded investigation, and each dead end added to Maria's growing sense that she was chasing shadows. The case files had grown to fill 3 bankers' boxes, thousands of pages of interviews, reports, and evidence that collectively proved nothing except that Jennifer Walsh had vanished without a trace. By summer, the investigation had been officially downgraded to cold case status. Maria would continue working it as time permitted, but the department could no longer justify dedicating significant resources to a case with no viable leads. Other crimes demanded attention, other victims needed justice, and the reality of police work meant that unsolved cases eventually had to make room for new ones. The anniversary of Jennifer's disappearance passed quietly. The Walsh family held a private memorial service. Coach Brennan organized a moment of silence before the first football game of the new season. David Chen wrote a retrospective article about the case that managed to be both hopeful and heartbreaking. And Maria Valdez sat in her car outside the nature preserve at exactly 7:30 p.m., watching joggers follow the same route that had led Jennifer Walsh to her death exactly 1 year earlier. Somewhere in Coral Springs, a killer was also marking the anniversary, probably feeling confident that he'd gotten away with murder. The investigation had touched his life. Everyone in the community had been interviewed, questioned, or at least asked to provide information. He'd probably participated in search efforts, attended memorial services, maybe even donated money to the scholarship fund established in Jennifer's name. But he'd made no mistakes that the police had been able to detect, left no evidence that forensic science could interpret, created no patterns that behavioral analysis could decode. He'd committed what appeared to be the perfect crime, and as the months passed without arrest or resolution, his confidence would only grow. Maria didn't know it yet, but she would carry Jennifer's case with her for the next 26 years, never fully letting go, never completely moving on. The girl who'd vanished from a suburban paradise would haunt her dreams and shape her career, driving her to solve other cases, while the one that mattered most remained forever just out of reach. And Coach Tommy Brennan would continue being the pillar of the community, the man everyone turned to in times of crisis, the trusted mentor who dedicated his life to helping young people achieve their dreams. His secret would remain buried as deeply as Jennifer herself, waiting for advances in forensic science that wouldn't arrive for more than 2 decades. Detective Maria Valdez had been retired from the Coral Springs Police Department for 3 years when the call came. That would change everything. It was a Tuesday morning in March 2024, and she was tending to her small garden behind the modest house she'd bought 2 miles from where Jennifer Walsh had once lived. The tomatoes were coming in beautifully this year, and she'd been contemplating whether to expand the herb section when her phone rang. "Maria, it's Captain Rodriguez." The voice belonged to Danny Rodriguez, the rookie officer who'd found Jennifer's Walkman all those years ago. He'd worked his way up through the department and now held the position that had once belonged to Captain Williams. "I need you to come in. We've got developments on the Walsh case." Maria's hands went still on the pruning shears. In 26 years, she'd received dozens of similar calls. New tips, potential leads, supposed breakthroughs that inevitably led nowhere. She'd learned not to get her hopes up, but something in Rodriguez's voice suggested this was different. "What kind of developments?" "DNA, the kind that's going to change everything." "How soon can you get here?" 40 minutes later, Maria sat in the same conference room where she'd once stared at crime scene photographs and evidence boards. The space looked different now. Modern computers had replaced the old filing systems. Digital displays showed crime statistics in real time, and the coffee machine actually worked. But the fundamental purpose remained the same. This was where detectives tried to make sense of the senseless, where they attempted to find justice for victims who couldn't speak for themselves. Dr. Sarah Chen sat at the conference table, her laptop open to a genetic genealogy database that looked like something from a science fiction movie. She was David Chen's daughter, the quiet biology student who'd been Jennifer's lab partner, now a forensic geneticist with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. The irony of her involvement wasn't lost on anyone in the room. "We've been working on a backlog of cold cases using familial DNA searching," Dr. Chen explained, her voice carrying the careful precision of someone accustomed to explaining complex science to law enforcement personnel. "The Walkman that was found in the preserve, we were able to extract additional genetic material using new amplification techniques that weren't available in 1998. Maria felt her pulse quicken. She'd always suspected there had to be more evidence on that Walkman than the original forensics team had been able to detect. The device had been in Jennifer's hands when she was attacked, had probably been grabbed or torn away during the struggle. If the perpetrator had touched it, left even microscopic traces of DNA, the new technology might finally be able to detect it. "We found foreign DNA on the headphone cord," Dr. Chen continued. "Male DNA that doesn't match Jennifer or anyone in her family. We ran it through Codice first. No matches in the criminal database. But then we uploaded it to GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA, looking for familial connections. The genealogy databases had revolutionized cold case investigations over the past decade. By comparing unknown DNA samples to the genetic profiles of people who'd voluntarily submitted their information for ancestry research, investigators could often identify suspects through their family connections. It was the same technique that had solved the Golden State Killer case and dozens of other cold cases that had seemed impossible to crack. "We got a hit," Dr. Chen said, clicking to a new screen that showed a complex family tree diagram. Third cousins on the paternal side, second cousins on the maternal side. Enough connections to build a solid genealogical profile. Maria stared at the screen, watching as Dr. Chen highlighted different branches of the family tree. Names and dates appeared and disappeared as she traced genetic connections across generations, following bloodlines that would eventually lead to a single suspect. The process looked impossibly complex, but the science behind it was sound. Everyone carried the genetic signature of their ancestors, and those signatures could be decoded with enough patience and expertise. "The suspect profile led us to the Brennan family line," Dr. Chen said, her voice suddenly quieter. "Multiple connections, all pointing to the same individual." The room fell silent. Maria felt something cold settle in her stomach, a sensation she hadn't experienced since her days working homicides in Miami. She'd interviewed dozens of suspects over the years and had developed an instinct for recognizing deception and violence, but this particular name carried emotional weight that went beyond professional interest. "Thomas Brennan?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Coach Brennan, Captain Rodriguez confirmed. "We've been watching him for the past 2 weeks, building a case, making sure we have everything right before we move. The DNA evidence is conclusive. The probability of it belonging to someone else is less than 1 in 50 billion. Maria closed her eyes, trying to process information that challenged everything she thought she knew about the case. Tommy Brennan had been there from the beginning, organizing search parties, comforting grieving families, serving as the community's rock when everything else was falling apart. He'd looked her in the eye dozens of times over the years, had expressed frustration about the lack of progress, and had sworn that Jennifer deserved better than an unsolved case. "Where is he now?" she asked. "Still teaching, still coaching?" Cypress Creek High School never let him go. He's been there for 41 years now, scheduled to retire at the end of this school year. Married to the same woman, lives in the same house he's owned since 1985. Model citizen, by all appearances. The psychological profile from 1998 had been accurate in ways that were now chilling to contemplate. A white male between 25 and 45, who would appear normal to his neighbors, might be married, would follow the investigation closely and possibly participate in search efforts. Brennan had been 36 when Jennifer disappeared, had been married for 8 years, and had inserted himself into every aspect of the investigation and memorial efforts. "How many other girls?" Maria asked, dreading the answer. "We're investigating that now," Captain Rodriguez replied. "There are similar cases from other jurisdictions, missing teenagers, unsolved murders. We're comparing DNA evidence from those scenes, looking for patterns. The preliminary indications suggest Jennifer wasn't his first victim, and she probably wasn't his last." The scope of the revelation was staggering. For 26 years, Thomas Brennan had continued working with teenagers, had maintained his position of authority and trust, had probably been selecting and stalking additional victims while simultaneously helping to memorialize the ones he'd already killed. The memorial runs through the nature preserve took on a new and horrifying significance, a serial killer returning to the scene of his crimes under the guise of honoring his victim. "We're executing search warrants tomorrow morning," Rodriguez continued. "His house, his office at the school, his vehicle. We expect to find evidence related to Jennifer and possibly other victims. Photographs, personal items, maybe even a confession or journal. Killers like Brennan often keep trophies." Maria thought about Jennifer's parents, now in their 70s, who'd spent 26 years not knowing what had happened to their daughter. They'd trusted Brennan, had been grateful for his support during their darkest hours, had probably invited him into their home dozens of times over the years. The betrayal would be devastating, but at least they would finally have answers. "I want to be there for the arrest," Maria said. "I was hoping you'd say that. You've earned the right to see this through." The arrest was scheduled for Thursday morning at 6 a.m., just as Brennan would be arriving at school for his usual early morning routine. They couldn't risk attempting it at his house, where his wife might be endangered, and they wanted to avoid a scene at the school that might traumatize students. The plan was to take him in the parking lot, quickly and quietly, before anyone else arrived for the day. Maria spent the next 2 days reviewing everything she remembered about her interactions with Brennan over the years. His behavior during interviews, his body language when discussing Jennifer, his eagerness to help with the investigation. Looking back with the knowledge she now possessed, she could see signs she'd missed, moments when his concern had seemed slightly performative, instances when he'd shown too much interest in specific aspects of the investigation, occasions when his grief had appeared rehearsed rather than genuine. The night before the arrest, she visited Jennifer's grave one final time. The marker looked exactly the same as it had for the past 25 years, but everything else had changed. The question that had haunted her for more than half her adult life was finally going to be answered. Jennifer Walsh would have justice, and Thomas Brennan would face consequences for the evil he'd hidden behind a mask of community service and false compassion. "We got him. Jennifer," she whispered to the granite stone. It took 26 years, but we finally got him. Thursday morning dawned clear and cool, the kind of Florida weather that made living in the state worthwhile. Maria arrived at Cypress Creek High School at 5:45 a.m., joining a team of detectives, FBI agents, and crime scene technicians who'd been preparing for this moment for weeks. The parking lot was empty except for their vehicles, the school buildings silent in the pre-dawn darkness. At exactly 6:03 a.m., Thomas Brennan's Honda Civic pulled into his customary parking space near the gymnasium. The man who emerged from the car looked exactly as Maria remembered him, still tall and athletic despite his age, still carrying himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to respect and authority. He was reaching for his briefcase when Captain Rodriguez approached from behind. "Thomas Brennan, you're under arrest for the murder of Jennifer Walsh." The transformation was instantaneous and chilling. The mask of benevolent concern that Brennan had worn for 26 years simply vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating. He didn't protest his innocence, didn't express shock or confusion, didn't ask what evidence they had against him. Instead, he smiled, a thin, knowing expression that confirmed everything Maria had suspected about the darkness hidden behind his public persona. "I was wondering when you'd finally figure it out," he said as the handcuffs clicked into place. "I have to admit, I'm impressed it took this long." Detective Maria Valdez had been retired from the Coral Springs Police Department for 3 years when the call came that would change everything. It was a Tuesday morning in March 2024, and she was tending to her small garden behind the modest house she'd bought 2 miles from where Jennifer Walsh had once lived. The tomatoes were coming in beautifully this year, and she'd been contemplating whether to expand the herb section when her phone rang. "Maria, it's Captain Rodriguez." The voice belonged to Danny Rodriguez, the rookie officer who'd found Jennifer's Walkman all those years ago. He'd worked his way up through the department and now held the position that had once belonged to Captain Williams. "I need you to come in. We've got developments on the Walsh case." Maria's hands went still on the pruning shears. In 26 years, she'd received dozens of similar calls. New tips, potential leads, supposed breakthroughs that inevitably led nowhere. She'd learned not to get her hopes up, but something in Rodriguez's voice suggested this was different. What kind of developments? DNA, the kind that's going to change everything. How soon can you get here? 40 minutes later, Maria sat in the same conference room where she'd once stared at crime scene photographs and evidence boards. The space looked different now. Modern computers had replaced the old filing systems. Digital displays showed crime statistics in real time, and the coffee machine actually worked. But the fundamental purpose remained the same. This was where detectives tried to make sense of the senseless, where they attempted to find justice for victims who couldn't speak for themselves. Dr. Sarah Chen sat at the conference table, her laptop open to a genetic genealogy database that looked like something from a science fiction movie. She was David Chen's daughter, the quiet biology student who'd been Jennifer's lab partner, now a forensic geneticist with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. The irony of her involvement wasn't lost on anyone in the room. "We've been working on a backlog of cold cases using familial DNA searching," Dr. Chen explained, her voice carrying the careful precision of someone accustomed to explaining complex science to law enforcement personnel. "The Walkman that was found in the preserve, we were able to extract additional genetic material using new amplification techniques that weren't available in 1998. Maria felt her pulse quicken. She'd always suspected there had to be more evidence on that Walkman than the original forensics team had been able to detect. The device had been in Jennifer's hands when she was attacked, had probably been grabbed or torn away during the struggle. If the perpetrator had touched it, left even microscopic traces of DNA, the new technology might finally be able to detect it. "We found foreign DNA on the headphone cord," Dr. Chen continued. "Male DNA that doesn't match Jennifer or anyone in her family. We ran it through CODIS first, no matches in the criminal database. But then we uploaded it to GD Match and Family Tree DNA, looking for familial connections. The genealogy databases had revolutionized cold case investigations over the past decade. By comparing unknown DNA samples to the genetic profiles of people who'd voluntarily submitted their information for ancestry research, investigators could often identify suspects through their family connections. It was the same technique that had solved the Golden State Killer case and dozens of other cold cases that had seemed impossible to crack. "We got a hit," Dr. Chen said, clicking to a new screen that showed a complex family tree diagram. Third cousins on the paternal side, second cousins on the maternal side. Enough connections to build a solid genealogical profile. Maria stared at the screen, watching as Dr. Chen highlighted different branches of the family tree. Names and dates appeared and disappeared as she traced genetic connections across generations, following bloodlines that would eventually lead to a single suspect. The process looked impossibly complex, but the science behind it was sound. Everyone carried the genetic signature of their ancestors, and those signatures could be decoded with enough patience and expertise. The suspect profile led us to the Brennan family line, Dr. Chen said, her voice suddenly quieter. Multiple connections all pointing to the same individual. The room fell silent. Maria felt something cold settle in her stomach, a sensation she hadn't experienced since her days working homicides in Miami. She'd interviewed dozens of suspects over the years and had developed an instinct for recognizing deception and violence, but this particular name carried emotional weight that went beyond professional interest. "Thomas Brennan?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Coach Brennan," Captain Rodriguez confirmed. "We've been watching him for the past 2 weeks, building a case, making sure we have everything right before we move. The DNA evidence is conclusive. The probability of it belonging to someone else is less than 1 in 50 billion. Maria closed her eyes, trying to process information that challenged everything she thought she knew about the case. Tommy Brennan had been there from the beginning, organizing search parties, comforting grieving families, serving as the community's rock when everything else was falling apart. He'd looked her in the eye dozens of times over the years, had expressed frustration about the lack of progress, and had sworn that Jennifer deserved better than an unsolved case. "Where is he now?" she asked. "Still teaching, still coaching. Cypress Creek High School never let him go. He's been there for 41 years now, scheduled to retire at the end of this school year. Married to the same woman, lives in the same house he's owned since 1985. Model citizen by all appearances. The psychological profile from 1998 had been accurate in ways that were now chilling to contemplate. A white male between 25 and 45, who would appear normal to his neighbors, might be married, would follow the investigation closely and possibly participate in search efforts. Brennan had been 36 when Jennifer disappeared, had been married for 8 years, and had inserted himself into every aspect of the investigation and memorial efforts. How many other girls? Maria asked, dreading the answer. "We're investigating that now," Captain Rodriguez replied. "There are similar cases from other jurisdictions. Missing teenagers, unsolved murders. We're comparing DNA evidence from those scenes, looking for patterns. The preliminary indications suggest Jennifer wasn't his first victim, and she probably wasn't his last." The scope of the revelation was staggering. For 26 years, Thomas Brennan had continued working with teenagers, had maintained his position of authority and trust, had probably been selecting and stalking additional victims while simultaneously helping to memorialize the ones he'd already killed. The memorial runs through the nature preserve took on a new and horrifying significance, a serial killer returning to the scene of his crimes under the guise of honoring his victim. "We're executing search warrants tomorrow morning," Rodriguez continued. "His house, his office at the school, his vehicle. We expect to find evidence related to Jennifer and possibly other victims. Photographs, personal items, maybe even a confession or journal." Killers like Brennan often keep trophies. Maria thought about Jennifer's parents, now in their 70s, who'd spent 26 years not knowing what had happened to their daughter. They'd trusted Brennan, had been grateful for his support during their darkest hours, and had probably invited him into their home dozens of times over the years. The betrayal would be devastating, but at least they would finally have answers. "I want to be there for the arrest," Maria said. "I was hoping you'd say that. You've earned the right to see this through." The arrest was scheduled for Thursday morning at 6 a.m., just as Brennan would be arriving at school for his usual early morning routine. They couldn't risk attempting it at his house, where his wife might be endangered, and they wanted to avoid a scene at the school that might traumatize students. The plan was to take him in the parking lot, quickly and quietly, before anyone else arrived for the day. Maria spent the next 2 days reviewing everything she remembered about her interactions with Brennan over the years. His behavior during interviews, his body language when discussing Jennifer, his eagerness to help with the investigation. Looking back with the knowledge she now possessed, she could see signs she'd missed, moments when his concern had seemed slightly performative, instances when he'd shown too much interest in specific aspects of the investigation, occasions when his grief had appeared rehearsed rather than genuine. The night before the arrest, she visited Jennifer's grave one final time. The marker looked exactly the same as it had for the past 25 years, but everything else had changed. The question that had haunted her for more than half her adult life was finally going to be answered. Jennifer Walsh would have justice, and Thomas Brennan would face consequences for the evil he'd hidden behind a mask of community service and false compassion. "We got him. Jennifer," she whispered to the granite stone. "It took 26 years, but we finally got him." Thursday morning dawned clear and cool, the kind of Florida weather that made living in the state worthwhile. Maria arrived at Cypress Creek High School at 5:45 a.m., joining a team of detectives, FBI agents, and crime scene technicians who'd been preparing for this moment for weeks. The parking lot was empty except for their vehicles. The school building silent in the pre-dawn darkness. At exactly 6:03 a.m., Thomas Brennan's Honda Civic pulled into his customary parking space near the gymnasium. The man who emerged from the car looked exactly as Maria remembered him, still tall and athletic despite his age, still carrying himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to respect and authority. He was reaching for his briefcase when Captain Rodriguez approached from behind. "Thomas Brennan, you're under arrest for the murder of Jennifer Walsh." The transformation was instantaneous and chilling. The mask of benevolent concern that Brennan had worn for 26 years simply vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating. He didn't protest his innocence, didn't express shock or confusion, didn't ask what evidence they had against him. Instead, he smiled, a thin, knowing expression that confirmed everything Maria had suspected about the darkness hidden behind his public persona. "I was wondering when you'd finally figure it out," he said as the handcuffs clicked into place. "I have to admit, I'm impressed it took this long." The interrogation room at the Broward County Sheriff's Department had been updated since 1998, but the fundamental atmosphere remained unchanged. Sterile walls, harsh fluorescent lighting, and the weight of accumulated confessions from decades of criminals who'd finally run out of places to hide. Thomas Brennan sat across from Detective Maria Valdez with his hands folded calmly on the metal table, looking more like a grandfather waiting for Sunday dinner than a man facing charges for murder. "You know what's interesting about small towns?" Brennan said, breaking the silence that had stretched for nearly 10 minutes. "Everyone thinks they know everyone else. But the truth is, people only see what they want to see, what they expect to see." Maria had been conducting interrogations for 30 years, but this felt different. Usually, suspects either proclaimed their innocence with desperate fervor or remained silent on advice of counsel. Brennan seemed almost eager to talk, as if he'd been waiting decades for someone to finally ask the right questions. "Tell me about Jennifer," Maria said simply. Brennan's expression shifted subtly. taking on a quality that might have been mistaken for fondness if you didn't know what he'd done. Jennifer was special, not just because she was beautiful, though she was, of course, but because she had this light inside her, this absolute certainty that the world was good, that people could be trusted, that everything would work out if she just tried hard enough. The way he spoke about her made Maria's skin crawl. There was genuine affection in his voice, twisted and perverted, but real nonetheless. This wasn't the detached clinical description of a victim from a random predator. This was something far more disturbing, a killer who genuinely cared about the girl he'd murdered. I watched her for months, Brennan continued, his voice taking on the rhythm of confession. Not in any inappropriate way, you understand. She was in my health class, came to me for advice about college applications, and volunteered for the youth mentorship program I coordinated. I had dozens of opportunities to observe her, to understand what made her special. The search warrant executed at Brennan's house that morning had revealed a hidden room behind his home office, accessible through a bookshelf that swung open like something from a horror movie. Inside, investigators had found a grotesque shrine to his victims, photographs, personal items, detailed journals documenting his observations and fantasies. Jennifer's student ID card had been mounted in a place of honor, surrounded by similar mementos from at least 8 other young women spanning 4 decades. The thing about being a coach, a teacher, a mentor, Brennan explained, is that people bring you their problems. They trust you with their secrets, their fears, their dreams. Jennifer told me she sometimes felt unsafe jogging alone, worried about strange men who might be watching her. Ironic, don't you think? Maria forced herself to remain professional, to treat this as just another interrogation, despite the personal history that connected her to this case. But listening to Brennan describe his manipulation of Jennifer's trust was testing her limits in ways she hadn't expected. She came to me 3 weeks before she died, he continued. Said she had a feeling someone was following her, watching her house. Asked if I thought she was being paranoid. I told her she was probably just nervous about college applications, maybe stressed about homecoming. Convinced her it was all in her head. The cruelty was breathtaking. Brennan had spent months stalking Jennifer, learning her routines, planning his attack. And when her instincts warned her of danger, he'd used his position of authority to silence those warnings, to convince her that her fear was irrational. He'd literally coached his victim into vulnerability. How did you get her to the preserve that night? Maria asked. Brennan smiled, and for a moment his mask slipped completely, revealing something predatory and ancient beneath the grandfatherly exterior. I didn't have to get her anywhere. Jennifer was a creature of habit, same route, same time, same Walkman playing the same songs. All I had to do was wait. The forensic timeline had been reconstructed using the evidence from Brennan's hidden room. His journals contained detailed observations of Jennifer's routines, maps of the nature preserve with specific locations marked, even weather reports for the weeks leading up to her death. He'd planned the attack with the methodical precision of a military operation. I was already in the preserve when she started her run, he said. Hidden in the brush near the side trail, where I knew she sometimes went to stretch. She was listening to music, completely unaware of her surroundings. When I stepped onto the path in front of her, she actually smiled and said hello. Maria's hands clenched beneath the table. The image of Jennifer's final moments, seeing her trusted teacher and mentor, feeling relief instead of fear, never understanding the danger until it was too late, was almost unbearable. What happened then? She forced herself to ask. I told her I'd been worried about her, that I'd seen someone suspicious in the area and wanted to make sure she was safe. Asked her to come with me to a more secluded spot where we could talk privately. She trusted me completely and never questioned my motives for being there. The manipulation was masterful and horrifying. Brennan had used Jennifer's own safety concerns against her, had positioned himself as her protector, even as he led her toward death. The side trail where her Walkman had been found was exactly where he'd intended to take her from the beginning. She fought, Brennan said, his voice taking on a different quality. Once she realized what was happening, she fought harder than I expected. Knocked the Walkman out of her hands trying to get away from me. But she was small, and I was much stronger. The physical evidence had told part of this story. Broken fingernails found at the scene, defensive wounds on Jennifer's hands documented in autopsy photographs, drag marks in the soft earth near the pond. But hearing Brennan describe the attack in his own words added a dimension of horror that forensic evidence couldn't convey. "Where did you put her body?" Maria asked. "Somewhere she'll never be found," Brennan replied. "I had years to plan for that possibility, to scout locations where someone could disappear permanently. The Everglades are vast, Detective Valdez. Millions of acres of swampland where things sink into the muck and stay buried forever. The search for Jennifer's remains had resumed with Brennan's arrest, using ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, and dive teams to explore areas identified in his journals. But Florida's unique geography made body recovery extremely difficult, especially after 26 years. Alligators, natural decomposition, and the acidic water of the swamps could eliminate all traces of human remains given enough time. "Why Jennifer specifically?" Maria asked. "You had access to hundreds of students over the years. What made her different?" Brennan was quiet for a long moment, staring at something beyond the walls of the interrogation room. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a quality that might have been regret if it had come from anyone else. "She reminded me of someone I knew when I was young. A girl who had that same innocence, that same trust in the goodness of the world. I wanted to possess that quality, to own it completely. And the only way to truly possess something that pure is to destroy it." The psychological evaluation would later reveal that Brennan exhibited classic characteristics of an organized serial killer: high intelligence, careful planning, ability to maintain normal social relationships while concealing his true nature. His marriage had provided the perfect cover. His career had given him access to victims, and his community standing had made him above suspicion. "The other victims," Maria said. "Tell me about them. Different cities, different states. I was careful never to establish a pattern in one location. A girl in Tampa in 1987, another in Orlando in 1993, two in Georgia when I took the team to summer camp, one in North Carolina during a family vacation." His voice had become matter-of-fact, as if he were reciting a grocery list rather than confessing to multiple murders. The FBI was coordinating with law enforcement agencies across the Southeast to match Brennan's confession with unsolved cases. The evidence from his hidden room suggested at least 8 victims over 4 decades, but the true number might be higher. Some cases might never be connected, some bodies might never be found, some families might never know what happened to their daughters. "Why now?" Maria asked. "Why confess to everything?" Brennan leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking at every one of his 70 years. "Because I'm dying, Detective. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed 6 months ago. The doctors give me maybe a year, probably less. I've lived with these secrets for so long that they've become part of who I am, but taking them to the grave feels incomplete somehow." The revelation added another layer of horror to his confession. Brennan wasn't talking because he felt remorse or wanted to make amends. He was talking because death was approaching, and he wanted his crimes to be remembered, his intelligence acknowledged, his ability to fool an entire community for decades to be appreciated. "Jennifer's parents deserve to know the truth," he continued. "They've suffered enough uncertainty, and I suppose I want people to understand that evil doesn't always look like what they expect. Sometimes it looks like the man who coached their children, who helped them with their problems, who was there for them in times of crisis." The trial would be a formality. With Brennan's confession, the DNA evidence, and the physical proof found in his house, conviction was inevitable. The death penalty was possible, but given his terminal diagnosis, life imprisonment would likely be the outcome. Justice would finally be served. but it would come at the cost of shattering a community's faith in their ability to recognize evil when it lived among them. As Maria left the interrogation room that evening, she felt no sense of triumph or closure. Jennifer Walsh was still dead, her body still lost somewhere in the vast wilderness of the Everglades. Her parents had spent 26 years wondering what had happened to their daughter, carrying guilt and false hope that had shaped every day since her disappearance. But at least now they would know the truth, at least the monster who'd stolen Jennifer's future, who'd betrayed the trust of an entire community, who'd hidden behind a mask of service and compassion while planning and executing the murders of innocent young women, would finally face consequences for his actions. The boy who'd once dreamed of helping young people achieve their potential had become the predator who destroyed those dreams. The man who'd been trusted with the community's most precious treasures had violated that trust in the most horrific way possible. And the coach who'd taught lessons about teamwork, perseverance, and integrity had lived a lie so complete that it had fooled everyone who knew him for nearly half a century. Thomas Brennan would die in prison, his legacy forever defined by the evil he'd hidden behind his public persona. But Jennifer Walsh would be remembered for the light she'd brought to the world during her brief 17 years, for the dreams she'd harbored and the good she'd planned to do. Her death had been senseless, but her memory would inspire others to recognize that evil can wear any face, and that vigilance is the price of protecting innocence. In the end, that might be the most important lesson of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.